This time on the Prop Master, well, no more teasing. We actually start working on the Sabine Wren helmet. Just the first step, but we're on our way. That's right, no more teasing. We're finally actually going to start construction on the helmet itself. It's not that much to look at yet, but it's the first step. I usually call this the basic bucket. And it is, it's basically the helmet. It just doesn't have any of the detailed parts on it yet, or any of the parts that make it look pretty yet. But, it's a really good step in the right direction. So let's get started on that. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to make Sabine's helmet, other than your EVA foam, are going to be the templates. Got them right here. I'll post a link so that you can find these down in the information section of this video. But you want this helmet to fit your head, right? So you're going to need to know what percentage to print this out at. Now the templates are set up to make a helmet that is 22 inches in circumference on the inside, right around your head at this point. I'm making the helmet for my daughter, so I need to figure out what percentage to print this out at so that it'll fit her. So let's pretend that my little friend here is my daughter's head, and you can't see it on camera, but I am totally tangled up with my measuring tape. Okay. In order to do that, you want to take a measuring tape, as opposed to a tape measure, which is metal and wouldn't work very well. And you want to line it up just above the eyebrows and run it as flat as you can around your head. It's actually pretty natural when you're doing it to yourself. And I don't know if you can see that, but it is pretty much right at 21 1/8 inches. Now if you don't have a measuring tape, you can just take a piece of string or ribbon or whatever you have, do the same thing just above the eyebrows, mark it with your fingers, and then take a ruler, lay it down, and you can see that it is at, I don't know if you can see on the camera, but you can see that it is at 21 1/8 inches. Now I use an old proportion scale that I've had since art school a long time ago. And to use one of these, it's pretty simple. You take the size of the original, which we know the templates are made for a 22-inch helmet. So I'll put 22 on here, or I find 22 on here. And this disc is what you want it to be, which is going to be 21 inches, or 21 1/8 inches. And you line those up, and you'll see that this says that it is about 96%. So in order to make a helmet that's going to fit this head, when I print out my templates, I'll print them out at 96%. Now if you don't have a proportion scale, which I'd be surprised if you did, to be honest, there's a lot of different apps that you can get for your iPhone or Android, or probably even your computer. I have one called Proportion Scale, and you can see here that you just put in the size of the original at the top and the size that you want it to be at the bottom, and it'll give you the different percentages to go between the two. And it shows here that it is 95 1/2 inches, basically. So once you have the information, you can just open up the templates and print them out at that percentage. Now, if you're using Acrobat, I've noticed that Acrobat will not allow you to change the size. So when you download the PDF files, make sure it does not open in Acrobat. I usually just open it up in my browser, and from there I can print it out at whatever percentage I want. So now that you have your templates printed out the right size, the first thing you want to do is to measure the rule that I have at either the top or the side of the page. Now these are reduced from 100%, so you know it's not going to line up perfectly, by which I mean the 7 inches is not going to measure as 7 inches. But what I'm interested here is making sure that it's consistent across all the different prints. So looking here, it looks like it is the 7 on the template is exactly 1/8 of an inch smaller than actual 7 inches. So it's 6 7/8. So I take the next page and we'll measure that one. And that one is also pretty much exactly 6 7/8. And 6 7/8. Now on this piece, we measure it. You're only going to go to the 7, not to the 9, since we're trying to compare it to the others. And I don't know if you can see it, but this one's not 6 7/8. This one's about 1/16 of an inch shorter. And when this happened originally, it really threw me off. I would get quite a few that all matched up, and then suddenly I'd start coming across some that wouldn't match up. And I reworked my files several times. I think I've got quite a stack here of failed attempts. And what I finally realized that was happening was that my printer is condensing the file when it vertically. So it's printing all the horizontals the same, but it's condensing them just ever so slightly vertically. So that what I finally figured out was that all my horizontals are matching up and all my verticals are matching up. And they're only off by about 1/8 of an inch. So that's really not going to affect the helmet that much if my helmet is 1/8 of an inch shorter overall. So I could have stretched this out so that it would match up, but that doesn't make any sense because your printer is not going to be making the same issues that my printer is making. So I went ahead and left it because 1/8 of an inch is not a big deal when it comes to the helmet in general. And I decided to go ahead and go with it. I don't think it's going to be a problem. But when you measure these, you get where the verticals are all matching and the horizontals are all matching, then you know that it's not going to be a problem. That your issue is your printer is not printing at the same percentage vertically and horizontally, and that's not uncommon from what I understand. I mean, it shouldn't be off by a lot. You know, 1/16 of an inch difference over, 7 inches is not a huge difference as far as the way that the helmet's going to work out. Once you make sure that everything matches, at least vertically and horizontally, hopefully in your case everything will print out just fine, and 7 inches here will match 7 inches here. It's time to go ahead and cut everything out. Now you can use an X-Acto knife or scissors, whatever you're comfortable with. I'm more comfortable with an X-Acto knife, so that's what I'm going to use, and let's get started. Okay, so now that we've basically cut all the patterns out, and I'm not going to cut this out right now. I'm going to go ahead and leave this the way it is, just so I don't have to keep track of all these little pieces everywhere. So when it comes time to work on the rangefinder and the ear pieces, then I'll go ahead and cut those out. We still have a little bit of tedious work left. Now I need to cut out all these little hash marks that are all over. And it's pretty simple stuff, it's just a little bit time consuming. You basically just want to make 2 marks to make a kind of V shape. I think I saw where Evil Ted had some kind of a little device that he can use that just clips out a little square piece. That would be nice. I think if he has something, he usually has a link to where you can buy it. So if you're going to do a lot of this kind of stuff, then I'd say go ahead and do that. I probably should do that, but I haven't. So basically just want to make a little V mark, roughly the same size as the mark itself, just so that you can get your Sharpie into that space and make a mark on your foam. You don't want it to get too thick, because then it's a hard, you can't really line up, you don't know precisely where that mark is when it gets really wide like that. But if you get too narrow, then the end of the marker doesn't actually fit into the notch and make a mark. So that's pretty much it for cutting out the templates, except for that one piece that has all the tiny little parts that I'm going to leave alone. So now we can go ahead and start marking up some of the foam. Okay, so I have 2 parts of my pattern, the parts that I use for the dome, L1 and L2, and I've just laid them out onto my floor mat, the foam floor mat piece, and I've tacked them down with some little straight pins. You don't want to use anything as thick as like a thumbtack or something like that, because that can actually leave a hole that will expand when you use the heat gun. So try to stick with the small little push pins. You just want to go ahead and outline around the pattern. Now, as you can see, there's an outline around there because I got a text on my phone, which I'm using to record, and it stopped my phone from recording. But you just want to trace around your pattern, and then you can go back and put in your hash marks. You can either use your regular Sharpie pen or marker, or you can get a finer tipped marker that can get in there a little better. Either way, I'll go back afterwards and color them in so that I make sure that everything is visible and large enough that you can still see it later after I put the pieces together. And once you have everything traced out, go ahead and take out or remove your pins. You just kind of scoot it to the side and go ahead and put your marks on here. And go ahead and draw in my hash marks again. That fine pin didn't do a very good job of marking. I mean, I can see where it is, but I wouldn't want to only go by those. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and flip this piece over. Do the same thing with L2 here. If you're not sure whether or not something is a mark that you made with your fine point pen, you can always just compare it to the original pattern and see if there's, should be a mark in that area. That looks good, so I'm going to flip this one over. And I'll go ahead and repin this, trace around these, and do the same thing here. Okay, now that I have everything marked, I can go ahead and start cutting this out. In order to make good cuts on this foam, there's just a few things you need to remember. First of all, make sure that you use the longest blade that you can that's sharp like a razor. I wouldn't necessarily try to use a chef's knife or something like that on here, just because it's just not quite sharp enough. Second of all, you want to have a very shallow angle when you're cutting. That'll give you a much cleaner cut than a sharp angle like this. You want to try and cut on the inside of this line because that's where the pattern was. And possibly most important of all those, excuse me, you need to make sure that the blade is straight up and down and not angled one side or the other, because you're going to try to put these back together afterwards, and if they're at weird angles, they're not going to fit properly. So try and make sure that your blade is as straight up as you can get it. Don't freak out if you get just a tiny bit off. This is pretty lenient as far as making sure the pattern is perfect. I just kind of get it lined up, and I just kind of go back and forth a little bit, and it'll saw directly through there. And then try to pull in one fluid movement, keeping the blade at a 90-degree angle to the ground. And you can see that there's a little bit of line here and there's no line here. That amount of deviation from the line was no big deal. Now, in the past, I've just used a knife and done all of that, but I recently bought a bandsaw, so I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of this on the bandsaw. I'm going to cut this into more manageable size, and the reason why I'm going to use the bandsaw is because I know that it's at 90 degrees, and it will give me the best joint that I can use to put them back together. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with using a razor blade, a razor knife of some kind to cut this out. If you watch my videos for the Boba Fett helmet, you'll see that that's all I used, and that was fine. The other thing that you can use, which you'll see on the Boba Fett video, is you can cut loosely around these edges and then use a disc sander, because that will also give you a perfect 90 degrees. But that only works for these convex shapes. If you have any kind of a concave shape, it won't work. But let's take this over to the bandsaw. Now, once again, if you don't have a bandsaw, don't worry about it. Everything will be just fine if you use an X-Acto knife or some kind of a sharp razor knife. That's what I've used in the past, and it's always worked out just fine. But since I actually do have a bandsaw with a scalloped soft materials blade, I'm going to go ahead and use it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move this guard down, and we'll see how this works. Well, I have to say that the lighting's a lot better over where I was using the knife, having a hard time seeing exactly where I'm trying to cut here. You definitely want to be careful if you're using a soft, well, you want to be careful with the power tools anyway, but if you're using a soft materials blade on a bandsaw, just remember that you are a soft material and it will cut through you like there's nothing there. Like you can cut yourself on this blade when it's turned off. Well, I'll be honest with you, I'd probably be better off with just using the knife. This is the first time I've tried to use this, and I think the lighting is making this very difficult for me. Okay, so now we can glue these up. Now that we have everything cut out, it's time to go ahead and glue these together. Now you can use several different types of glue on this. I know a lot of people that swear by CA or super glue, cyanoacrylate glue. I prefer to use barge cement for this. It's the same kind of glue they use to make shoes. It's a contact cement. It's also extremely strong and durable and fairly forgiving to use. It's not as quick as super glue is, but I just prefer it. It's not as brittle or as rigid as super glue is, so that's one of the main reasons I like to use it. Now you can buy this on the internet. Just do a search for barge cement and you can find it at 100 different places. Since this is foam and it's absorbent, you want to go ahead and give it one thin coat at first, and then once that dries, you go ahead and put a second coat on. And you know what? I should have my gloves on. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, now I've got my gloves on. The other thing about barge cement is you really want to be in a well ventilated area, or be wearing a respirator, or even both. Unfortunately, if I was wearing a respirator, you would not be able to understand what I was saying, so I'm not wearing one right now. But I am in a well ventilated area. I have my fans going. If you can keep as much off of the front of the foam as possible, that will make for a much nicer seam later on. I know that can be difficult, and as you can see, everything is more difficult when you put it on a camera. Now, depending on the temperature outside and the humidity, so if it's, you know, the hotter it is and the lower the humidity is, the quicker this will dry. I'm going to go ahead and let this sit for about 10 minutes, and then I'll be back and we can put on a second coat. So I'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, you can see here that everything's kind of dull now and it's not sticky at all. So it is dried and ready for the next coat. That first coat was basically just to seal up the foam. It gets sucked into the foam, and then when it dries, it seals it up so that the next layer will, you know, stay on the surface. Got my gloves on. In general, I like to use these disposable gloves for any time that I use glue. And again, it's like the first time, you just want to get a thin, even coat. I've just got a lot of these little scraps that I can use to smooth it out. If you get a lot of a thick layer of glue on here, just that when it dries, it has a dimension to it. And it's just going to make for a weaker joint in general. Okay, so wait about 10 more minutes and then we can stick these things together. It's been about 10 minutes, and so now we can check on these. Once again, they're not sticky, so we're ready to start putting these together. Now, as soon as these touch, they're going to stick, and it will not be easy to separate them. So try to get it right the first time. Find your L's, you know, your left side pieces, 1 and 2. Line up the B's, in this case, the same letters. So B to B. Try to use my thumb to make sure that the fronts are even. And there, then you want to just line up the hash marks. The more even you get these now, the less sanding you'll have later on. And right now you can see this starting to form a concave shape, which is sort of the opposite of what I want, but if it's concave like that, it'll hold the front edges tightly together, which is a good thing, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it. I can pop it back convex. Now I go to the R2, but the important part is A to A. You'll have to stretch one or the other to get the hash marks to line up, but that's normal. That's what's going to give it the three-dimensional shape. And unfortunately, as you get more and more of these pieces together, it's going to get harder and harder to get everything lined up. It just gets to be more and more unwieldy, but it's nothing that you can't handle. Okay, and our last piece. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn this the other way. That'll force those inside edges, or the top edges, to be tight, and that's what we really want more than anything else. Okay, and now we can go ahead and do basically the exact same procedure over again with the sides of the helmet. So for the sides of the helmet, the pattern, if you want to do the whole thing as one piece, then unfortunately you can't do it with just one tile. So I've taken two tiles and I've cut the edges off of each of them and glued them together using barge cement. But I still want to hide this seam for the most part. So I mean, the obvious thing you could do, I suppose, would be to put this in the middle. In fact, this might be the smarter thing to do. Because that would hide the seam, because this whole area will be covered with a piece of trim toward the end. In fact, I think I may just do that. I was going to do it mostly on one piece and then have the seam come down here on the side, but that would still leave half of the seam where I would have to smooth out. I'd have to fill it and smooth it. So I just need to pin this down, trace it just like we did before, and cut it out. Now there's a couple of things on here I just wanted to point out before I start cutting this out, and that is when I was putting this pattern together, these notches here line up, and that is the center of the helmet on the sides. The same with over here, and it's very close to where you're going to have to tape these together. So you can kind of see where I used the notch that was here, and I sort of cut a little spot in the tape so I could find the line that was there and use that to make my line. Similarly over here, I found the actual hash marks here and here and redrew the line on top of the tape, because you're going to want to make sure that you have those and that you can make these hash marks at the bottom and the top, because you're going to want to be able to mark that on your helmet when you're working on it, so that you'll have center point for the front and for the back, and for the sides. And you've got this dotted line here, which is for where the curve starts at the top of the sides of the helmet into the dome. And I'm not going to do cutouts there and put that on the foam, because in truth, when I start curving the foam, I'm just going to do, you know, 1.5 inches in, and just kind of doing roughly some curve in the edge. I'm not going to be worried about getting, you know, 100% precise on where that curve should be. So I'm not going to worry about trying to get that line onto the foam. So you can ignore that as well. So now I'm going to go ahead and trace this out. I forgot to mention this before, but if you don't want to use 2 separate floor tiles for this, you can just take 1/2, just peek either the right or the left side, and do that on, you know, 1/2 of this one piece. And then it's better to use just 1/2 piece and then flip that over like we did with some of the other pieces and mark that as left side, and do that up here. That way you can just use 1 floor tile for this and then glue the pieces together here. That's just a different way of doing it. If you don't want to use 2 pieces glued together. Let's go ahead and cut this out, and then we can go from there. Okay, I have most of the cuts done now. Just leaves the cuts for the 2 cheek areas here. Now, what's happening here is this part is going to be further into the helmet, whereas this part comes out more. So we want to angle these cuts so that the transition between this foam and the foam we use for the cheek itself can be a little bit more seamless. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to angle both cuts the same way. And this first one, I'm going to try to angle it so that it comes out, you know, sort of toward the camera here, and the same angle on the top, but of course then it'll be you know, will be foam coming out this way, but then foam going in on that one. It's hard to describe. I think you'll get the idea without any trouble. I'm going to start out pretty straight, and then as I can, I'm going to change that angle. Now you don't have to do this. If you're more comfortable, or if you're just not comfortable doing it this way and you want to just do it at a 90-degree angle, you can do that and come back later. I mean, I didn't do this on my first prototype and it turned out pretty good, but while I was doing it, I kind of wish that I had done this. And as you get down here, you can actually straighten back up again. You'll notice that I used a straight edge when I was cutting some of these parts that need to be, you know, straight, like where the backs are going to touch, and these 2 pieces here, they really kind of need to be straight, so there's no reason not to use a straight edge to make sure they're straight. Now it'll be the exact opposite on this one, so it'll actually be angled in that direction. This piece is just straight up and down. Got a little bit away from the line on here, so I'll be more careful. That's going to get covered up by the trim piece, so I'm not too worried about it. I already did this actually. And I should probably also say these knives are extremely sharp, so be careful when you're using them. I just have to be careful later on when I'm putting this together to make sure that this doesn't end up, you know, all weird shaped. But that's definitely doable. Okay, let's go ahead and cut these darts out. I think I'm going to do the next one on the bandsaw just because I can. So, got that one cut out. Okay. So there we have this piece cut out. I'm going to go ahead and make these marks a little bigger and easier to see because they have a tendency to disappear when it gets ready to start putting this whole thing together. And I think I'll go ahead and put my center point marks in. Okay, now we can start putting this together. First we will, I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and glue this onto the dome part. That way, if for some reason, I don't understand why there would be, but if there was some reason why the ends didn't line up, I can fix that then, as opposed to trying to put this together and then glue it onto the dome. Either way should work, but I think that it'd be safer to glue this onto the dome and then glue the ends together. Basically do the exact same thing we did with the dome itself, and that is we're going to put on a coat of barge cement onto these edges, wait 10 minutes, do a second coat, and also 2 coats onto the bottom of this. I'm going to go ahead and skip that on the video. You've seen how to do it, you don't need to see it again. Well, since I decided to attach this to the dome of the helmet as opposed to making the sides one piece first and then putting it on together, it means that I kind of need to go ahead and curve this part and make it line up in the same kind of a curve that the dome has before I do that. In order to do that, I'm going to take the heat gun. You can get heat guns pretty much, anywhere. You can get them at Target, Home Depot, your basic big box stores. They have several of them at Walmart, Lowe's, Most auto parts stores carry them. So if it's a place that sells any kind of tools, they're probably going to have a heat gun there that you could buy. I think this one cost $30. I've seen them as cheap as $19, but they're out there. You're going to want to turn it to its highest setting, and before I get to that, what I have here is a doorknob. It's about, the standard doorknob size, but the important thing is that it's completely spherical. It's not, there's no flat end on it or anything like that. So it's a nice rounded area. I guess it's about 2 inches across. It doesn't have to be a doorknob. It can be the end of a curtain rod, a plastic sphere from a hobby store. Anything that's going to give you that nice smooth round edge will be fine. I like the doorknob because I had a doorknob. So take your heat gun on its highest setting, wait a couple of seconds for it to heat up, and you're just going to pick the area that you're going to want to start with, and start to heat it up. I've noticed that some people like to use 2 heat guns at once, and I'm sure that probably works better, although it's a little bit more unwieldy. So just pick a small area. Heat it up good. You don't want it to turn completely black. You can also kind of smell it. And then I just want to, push down on the doorknob. You're trying to stretch this out good. You might have to do it more than once, but you can see that you're getting this curve into it. That's really all I need. It doesn't have to be exact. I can add to it after I finish everything off. Now, if you did this in 2 different parts and glued it together instead of one big piece, then you're going to want to let that glue dry for 3 to 4 hours before you start trying to do this. You might be able to get away with 2.5 hours, but the longer the better. Because if you don't, when you get here, it's just the heat's gonna separate the joint. And I'm just gonna continue going all the way around until I get the whole thing curved. And I'm not trying to get any kind of a specific, I just want sort of a gentle amount of relief to it, some curve. Now when you get to this part right here with the center point between the eyes, you want to make sure that you curve not just this upper part area, but try to make sure that this whole point in the center curves all the way from here all the way to the tip here, because you want that to be sort of a gentle curve that goes from the dome all the way down to where this stops. And I think from here I can go ahead and start gluing. Everything's glued up now, so I can come back and I can see that it's just a little bit tacky, but nothing moves. The glue doesn't come off at all when I touch it. So I know it's ready. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close up these darts. I do want to try to make sure that the fronts are level and that the top lines up. Do the same thing here. Just make sure that the tops line up and that this front edge is level. We'll cover it up later with some trim so it doesn't have to be too pretty, but you don't want to, push things any further than you need to. I've marked this with an F on the front and a B on the back, so I can make sure I've got the fronts. And I just want to line the middle here with this middle point right here. Use my thumb to make sure that the outside edges are as closely aligned as I can get them. And it can be tricky, but we're just gonna have to go around and try to get the hash marks to line up. If it accidentally sticks in the wrong place, you can kind of pry it apart. You should still have plenty of time to stick it back together. See, I'm getting a little bit off. Okay, see, I seem to have missed a hash mark there. It might, I don't think it could possibly line up with that right there, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip and I'll go with these two marks here, because I know there's no way that that is supposed to line up with that. So and unfortunately there is no easy way to do this. It's kind of a pain. You just got to wrestle through it until you get it. Probably would have been better if I'd done these darts and let them cure for a couple of hours first, but I think it's going to be okay. If you watched my Boba Fett videos, then you know that my mantra is pretty much it's going to be okay at the end. You can always fix it later if something goes wrong. You definitely don't want to get, you don't want to give up and feel frustrated and like you can't do it, because I guarantee you can do it. It's usually a little easier once you get one side of it done. If you can kind of hold it like this, where you've got one hand on this part with your thumb and your forefinger gripping that part, then your other hand doing the same here, it makes it a lot easier. You can't always do that. I'm about to run out of room to do that, but when you can, it makes it a lot easier. And this gets to be the hardest part because there's nowhere to grab it. There you go. You were so close there. This is acting like I didn't put a second coat of barge cement on the ends. So you know what, I'm going to wheel the glue there. But for whatever reason, it seems like this section here didn't get enough barge cement, so I'm going to add some. Not sure why that area doesn't want to glue, but no matter what it is, this will go ahead and take care of it. So I'll let this dry and then come back and seal it up. Okay, it's been about 10 more minutes, and so I'm going to go ahead and, yeah, it's dry. Let's go ahead and close this off. Then you just push in on the seams. Get those outside edges to bond well. And that looks rough now, but it'll actually, most of this is going to be removed later by the air vent. This is probably the roughest part here, and that'll be covered up by this piece of trim. Okay, now this just needs some shaping. Now it looks more like a bug right now than anything else, but it's actually looking pretty good. While we're waiting for that glue to completely cure, let's go ahead and work on the cheekbones. I'm just going to go ahead and tack these down and then outline it and cut it out. I forgot to mention, this is on 5mm craft foam. It's the same type of foam that you'll find in those floor tiles, but whereas the floor tiles you're going to find at a hardware store or someplace like that, you're going to find this most likely in a arts and crafts store or a hobby store. Here in the States, Hobby Lobby and Michael's both carry it. You're going to want to go with the 5mm thick, which is probably the thickest that most places carry. I'm sure you can also find it online. It's just generally called craft foam. It comes in, looks like about 11 by 17 sheet. I'm not sure about those dimensions, I'm just looking at it. So let's go ahead and outline this and cut it out. Just cut it straight down, it'll work just fine. Okay, now when I glue this, I'm just going to glue this outside edge, maybe 1/8 of an inch thick in. There's no reason to glue that whole area. That saying, if you do glue that whole area, it's really not going to hurt anything. A good thing I said that, because with this large brush, it's going to be difficult. This is a glue pot brush, which it has a much larger brush than the brush that actually comes in the barge cement can. And I think that brush in the can is probably better suited for more detailed work than this is. On this edge, it's the same thing. You don't really need to get beyond about 1/8 of an inch. And once again, I'm not wearing my gloves like I should be. Oops, that's the wrong end. Nothing like filming yourself to guarantee that you'll make silly mistakes the whole time. Switch over to this. There we go. See, this is the brush that will come in your barge cement can. You can see that it's a little bit better for getting into detailed areas, you know, getting small areas. little ends are kind of flimsy, but by the time we put the cheekbones on and then the visor itself on, it'll be supported in all directions, so it'll be fine. Okay, we'll wait 10 minutes and we'll come back and do the second coat, and then we can glue this whole thing together. It's been about 10 minutes, so everything feels good. Now this one's going to be difficult, I won't lie to you. But it's not that difficult. You're just going to have to twist some things around and force things to go where they need to go. You still want to try to get the front edges to line up. And they're going to want to touch before you're ready. Basically looking for just the face of it to touch. And at this point I'm not worried about getting the rest of the edge to stick. I just want the very front edge. And I'm kind of using my pinky to push this bottom part away from it. You might have to, squeeze one part or the other to get those hash marks to line up, or the end. There we go, got everything. And the same thing on this back edge. Kind of pick this up away from it so that it's not going to touch further down. I have to stretch it at this point. Then I've got to compress it at this point. Couldn't quite get that to compress enough to line up, so I might have to adjust my pattern just a little bit. We'll see how the other side turns out. Now that I have those front edges, I can kind of push and kind of get it to stick. Now let's do this side. I wouldn't try to squish this in so much that it distorts it too badly. It's just easier to cut it off if we need to. Now I'm kind of pinching this so that it's making a sort of a V shape on the bottom edge. And I'll do that a little bit more once I start heating it. But I want to go ahead and start that now when I'm getting the glue to set. And sort of pinch it the other direction at the top. Do the same thing on this side. Now I would be tempted, I think, to do this before I attach it to the dome next time. So that's something for you to keep in mind. You might want to add the cheekbones to the helmet sides before you attach the dome onto the helmet sides. I think it would probably be easier. Okay. Still weird, but a little less bug-like. The next thing we're going to want to do is to attach the visor so that it'll pull this down into shape. Okay, it's time to make your visor. And what I've got here is my pattern, obviously, but this is the polycarbonate shield for one of these, which is just a 3M professional face shield. You can get them at the big box home stores. You can get them at a lot of just regular hardware stores, places like that. It's just, you know, a safety shield for when you're using tools. I like it. It's got a nice curve to it. It's easy to work with. It works well with the tinting later on. If you can find a shield like this that is already tinted, that would be ideal. But I haven't been able to find one. I remember when I was a kid, it seemed like there were a lot of tinted shields like this they used for welding, but I haven't seen anything recently. And I've got it taped on, and I've cut my strips of tape very thin, just so that it doesn't cover up very much of this curved surface here. And I'm just going to take my Sharpie and trace around it. I know you can find visors online for Sabine Wren's helmet. I almost went that route because one of my nice subscribers sent me a link. The only problem is I don't know if it will work with my particular design. I hate to buy it and get it and then find out that it's a little bit too short or a slightly different shape. I mean, slightly different would be okay as long as it's bigger and not smaller. So you can always try it if you want. I know this part can be a little bit intimidating. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut this, or take this off. You can see her helmet is so much larger that it kind of gets into these little parts over here where there's stamped things on there, but I still think it'll be covered up by the tint, and I think it'll be fine. Okay, doesn't have to be exact. Now it's time to cut this out, and there's a lot of ways you can go about doing that. Depending on what tools you have access to, you can use a cheap little coping saw like this, and it'll do it. The hard part's going to be holding this in place while you do it, because it's going to want to move around a lot. You can use a Dremel tool with the little cutting disc on it, if you have one of those. If you watch in the Boba Fett video, you'll see that I used a skill saw, a reciprocating skill saw, to do this, and it works quite well actually. If you put a fine tooth blade on there, it'll do just fine. It looks like I'm about to cut my hand off at some point, but it's really not that dangerous. But you do have to be careful. I'd say the obvious choice for this is a bandsaw, and since I now have a bandsaw, I'm going to go ahead and use that. But however you do it, just go ahead and cut this out, and then we'll be ready for the next step. Okay, here's the visor cut out. It's a little bit rough, but it's going to be covered, you know, the edges will be covered up, so it's not important. This is just a piece of reasonably coarse sandpaper or sanding block, and I'm just going to, you don't have to do this, but I just thought I'd soften up these sharp edges a little bit. Just make sure you don't sand on the actual face of it. It'll make it hard to see later on. I just remembered that I didn't say anything about price on these visors. I don't remember exactly how much they cost. I bought about 5 of them all at once. But I do remember that it's definitely less than $20 each. I got mine at Home Depot. Okay, time to glue the visor on. I'm just going to be putting glue on like 1/8 of an inch, very thin area on here. So I'm going to go ahead and use the brush that came with the barge cement. Okay, and all you want to do is just kind of barely just kind of touch the edge of it on there. So that you're just putting glue on, you know, I'd say ideally would be about 1/8 of an inch. If you get a little more than that, it's okay. And also, I guess, when you cut out your visor, no matter how you did it, I'm assuming that you used safety glasses and all that good stuff. You're just going to continue this on all the way around. You don't have to do a first coat on the visor itself because it's not porous, so we'll just do one coat on it. Okay, and once this is dried up pretty good, we'll come back and do another coat on here and our one and only coat on the visor itself. Okay, so I'll be back in 10 minutes and we'll go from there. Now that the first layer of glue is dry on the helmet, let's go ahead and do the visor itself and the second layer of glue on the helmet. Just like we did on there, we're just going to do like a very thin, you see, not very thin, but very small, maybe 1/8 of an inch. Although, don't do it on the front like I just did. Goes on the back. You'll be a little bit more careful on this part. As far as only getting 1/8, you can get a little bit more, but don't get too out of hand because you have to be able to see through here. Plus, you'll end up using this as a guide for the placement on the, I guess they would call it the mandibles on the helmet, because they're a little wonky right now. You'll use this to help keep them in a straight line. So get the glare off of there. Believe it or not, this small amount of barge cement will hold just fine. Okay. I'll go ahead and put another layer on here. Okay, so 10 minutes and then we'll come back to do the rest of it. Okay, it's been a little over 10 minutes and let's see how this turns out. I'm going to start out by getting the center on there. It's going to be a challenge, I can tell. Okay, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a piece of paper that I can slide. That'll keep it from sticking over there. And it looks like I need to make these a little bit bigger still. So by the time you do yours, I will have enlarged the visor so that right now the edge is lining up exactly right there with that, and I don't want that. So I'll go ahead and go in the templates and increase the length on the visor, or the width, or however you want to call it. Sorry, I'm not saying much, I'm having to concentrate. I'm going to try to just have this overlap that 1/8 of an inch. And it won't necessarily be easy because the helmet is trying to be a different shape than it's supposed to be. And the visor is kind of forcing it back into place. So you definitely want to do your best to make sure that it only overlaps by about 1/8 of an inch. Kind of curl this in so that it doesn't stick further down the row. And the corner lines up, which is good. Or I should say the corner lines up, you know, 1/4 of an inch, or 1/8 of an inch past where the visor is. Now this is the one that was really kind of wobbly, so I want to definitely work to make sure that it is as straight as I can get it. Sorry, my voice is gone. That looks pretty good. So at this point, all we have to do is to go ahead and go in and heat the foam on the helmet so we can kind of shape it a little better. It's late enough that I'll probably let this go ahead and sit overnight, and then in the morning I'll put the heat to it. For you, you need to wait at least 2.5 hours. The longer the better. And after that glue cures for a while, then we can go ahead, hit it with the heat gun, and make sure it's the shape we want. So I'll see you in the morning. Okay, so it's had plenty of time for the glue to completely cure. So now we can start heating this up and fine-tuning the shape that we want. Once again, we have our heat gun set on high. And it's actually looking pretty good. The main thing I'm noticing is I don't like how the back kind of comes to a, kind of a mild point there toward the back. I want this to be more flat across the very center. So we'll start on that. And you just kind of bend it a little, beyond where you want it. And then as it cools, it'll stay where you put it. And it'll come back a little bit, but let's do this side. Now, if you are in the position to have 2 heat guns, or if you already have 2 heat guns for any reason, I think probably the 2 heat gun method works probably better. That way you can put 1 heat gun on the inside and 1 on the outside, and it'll probably take care of this, much quicker, more evenly. Because right now I'm basically just heating the inside of it. Okay, so now you can see that it's much more flat in the back. I think I want this area right here to also not be so directly from here to there. I want it to curve a little bit more. So I'm going to heat that up next. When you see it turn black like it just did on there, you've definitely heated it up a little too much, actually. And it's not really going to damage anything, it's just you don't want to go any more than that. You can kind of see it there, I think. Do this side now. The air that's coming out of the helmet and hitting my hand is extremely hot, so gloves are probably not a bad idea. One thing you might have noticed, and that you should pay attention to, is that I did the first heat up on here, and then went over to here, and then heated up this side, the opposite of that, and then over to here. That way I don't want to have too much heat back in that area where I just bent it, because I don't want the stress of the foam to put it back where it was. So I just want there to be a little bit of time for that area, the heat in that area, to dissipate before I come back and heat next to it. And I'm basically just trying to get this shape to kind of match the shape of the dome that you can see inside there. So that it's kind of consistent from the top all the way down. Now as you get into from the halfway point forward, it's going to be a very different shape, as it's going to come pretty much straight out toward the visor. And that's okay. That's the way it's supposed to go. I might want to make that not happen way back here. I might want to make this curve more and then straighten out. So I might add a little bit of curve to this area right here. So once again, I'll go to the opposite side that I just heated up. I'm getting some smoke off there. Definitely heated that up too much. My heat gun seems to be working better today than usual. Okay, that's not bad. I want this corner to go out a little bit more. You may have to go back and do areas that you've already done once. That's not a problem. Okay, I like. I think I need to heat up this area right here. I'm just trying to make it more symmetrical now. And this side's flaring out away from the center of the helmet a little bit more. So I want to kind of pull that in. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Okay, so I'm happy with the way this part looks. Now I just want to put a simple, or not simple, I want to put a slight concave curve here, and I want to try to push this in a little bit more so that it's more that shape. Right now it's kind of coming straight down, and I want to get it to there. I didn't have a problem on my prototype, so I'm wondering now if that might have to do with the angles that I cut into this. You're probably better off doing the angles in the helmet, but not in the cheekbone part, leaving that 90 degrees when you cut it, and not putting any kind of a bevel in the cheekbone itself. So the cheek part of the helmet, yes, put a bevel on, but do not put a bevel on the cheekbone. Okay, so let's So let's concentrate on the shape on the cheekbone first. Don't push it very much, just a little bit. You just want a little bit of that relief there. Okay, looks pretty good. Do the same thing on this side. Okay, we're actually very close now. I'm going to put, it's almost perfect the way it is. I'm tempted not to do anything actually. Okay, so I'm just going to put a little bit of heat across here so I can get a gentle curve into this cheek. It's pretty close to what I want now, so I don't need to do very much. See, I'm just kind of pushing a little bit of a curve. You It is hot. I'll do the same thing on this side. On my prototype, I got a little bit carried away and it was extremely flared out, which looked good. It just didn't look like Sabine Wren's helmet. I put a little too much pressure on my thumb there. Always better to use more surface area, small surface area you can get a little indentation like I just put in there. You can see that. It's a little thumbprint right there, but I can fix that later without any trouble at all. This is kind of Sabine Wren's helmet. From all the pictures I can tell, is a circle on top. Most of the helmets that I've dealt with are oval shaped, so I'm having to come to terms with the fact that hers seems to be circular. I want to make it oval, but we'll go with it circular at this point. Okay, so I think the basic bucket is completed and we're ready to go on to other parts in future videos. Okay, the only thing that I've done since we heated up and shaped the foam for the helmet is I took my Sharpie and I colored on the visor along where it's actually touching the foam. That's just going to make it a little easier to line up the trim pieces. And that's the next thing we need to do, is we need to add the trim for the visor and the back and ear pieces. However, you're going to have to wait for the next video for that. While you're waiting, feel free to go check out the videos that I did for the Boba Fett helmet build. If you found this video helpful, go ahead and give it a like, and why not subscribe so you don't miss out on the upcoming videos of the completion of the helmet, as well as Sabine, Jango, and Boba's armor, jetpacks, and weapons. So until next time, thanks, and see you in the next video.